Hello.
Oh, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. We talked about doing a podcast. Are you up for that today?
I am totally up for it.
All right, cool.
I know that it's going to be quite meandering, and I can be a bit of a meanderer in my in the way that I
Right.
talk. So just pull me back if you need to.
Don't worry. I won't. I don't think I'll need to. Okay. Hi, I'm Dave Gray, founder of the School of the Possible, where we're exploring a new approach to learning. Most schools focus on teaching existing facts. In the School of the Possible, we focus on possible facts, things that do not yet exist, but could be so. The school is about creating the future, but it is rooted in the present. No matter who you are or where you are, there is a best next step for you. A step that you can take. A step toward a better, more fulfilling, more meaningful life and work. A step toward a better world. That's the art of the possible. The art of the best next step. And it starts now. Hi, I'm Dave Gray, your host for The Art of the Possible, and with me today is Alison Coward. Alison has written a wonderful book called Workshop Culture, which I was happy to endorse. And she runs a company called Bracket, which is focused on improving teams and team culture. Welcome, Alison.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. The show is called The Art of the Possible, and I like to start by asking people when I use that phrase, the art of the possible, what does that mean to you and what has it meant for you in your life?
Mm, the art of the possible. But it means that anything's possible, right? I remember a conversation that we had before, and I think one of the things that I do marvel at from time to time is that any physical object that you see around you, any product that sits in front of you that you can look at now, at some point it didn't exist.
Mhm.
And so someone had to create that. And where did that creation come from? Where did it come from? So that's, I guess, the most tangible form of the art of the possible. It's that most things that you see around you that have been created by humans didn't exist at some point. And when did that become a possibility? And how did someone take the steps to bring something that didn't exist, that somehow emerged in their mind into something that is physical?
We can take a couple of those. You have a book that you wrote that
Yeah.
didn't exist before you wrote it. You have started a company which didn't exist before you started it. You have customers which who have choices thanks to you that they wouldn't have had otherwise. Can you go back to a time when maybe you just didn't believe or didn't think that these things were possible for you?
Yeah. It's interesting for me because I think I've always had a interest in creativity from when I was very young. I've always been drawn to art. I wanted to be a fashion designer when I was younger, and I remember these sort of sketches that I used to do of fashion designs when I was younger, and there was no one in my family that had done that. So I think creativity has always, for me, has always I've always seen it as an option. But I do remember there was the first few years of starting my business. And that's another thing as well. I'd always been surrounded by creative people and creative entrepreneurs. So I knew that creating something from nothing was possible because people around me had done it. Yet when I started my business, I had this idea, which is very different to what Bracket is now. And it wasn't quite working. And I do remember a moment where the business wasn't working. I wasn't quite where I wanted to be. And I also couldn't see how my life could be different. And this was probably in my early 30s. And I was just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, if I live the next 50, 60 of my years of my life like this, my life's not going to be very interesting. I honestly couldn't see a way out of that. And I think I remember reading a book around that time, and something just changed in my mind around, it was more to do with mindset than it was around creativity. And it was almost you need to create your life. If this is the life that you want, you need to create it. It's not just gonna fall to you. It's not just gonna come into existence without you taking the steps to create it. And that was a real kind of turning point for me because I didn't know that. I don't know
Mm.
how I didn't know that, but I didn't know that. I didn't realize that if you wanted a different kind of life or a life of intention, then you had to actually create that. And that was a real turning point for me.
Do you remember the name of that book or the
I
author?
do. I wouldn't say that I'm embarrassed. I'm a little bit apprehensive to share it, but it was Joe Dispenza, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself.
Wow.
Yeah. And he connects a lot of kind of brain science with change. And there is a spiritual element to it as well, which is why I guess I was apprehensive about sharing it, because I know that some people have apprehensions about sort of some of the spiritual realm. But it really did make a massive change for me because just that language around the language is your thoughts create your reality, essentially. And if you do what you've always done, then you're going to get what you've always got.
Hmm.
And so if you want something different, then you have to change how you think and how you show up and how you behave, it does sound really logical in a way, but for some reason that hadn't quite clicked for me before I read that book.
Isn't that interesting how something like a book can change your life?
Yeah, yeah, it really did. It really did.
If you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always gotten. And now you've written a book.
Mm.
I imagine writing a book changes your life too in interesting ways.
It does. This is my second book. So my first book was A Pocket Guide to Effective Workshops, and that was a really practical guide. It was a short book, 10,000 words. And I think with that book, the writing process was very different to this one, my latest one. And the
Mm.
reason the writing process was different was because in the first one, it felt that all I needed to do essentially was download the process that I was using to design, facilitate, and follow up on workshops. So it was just making my implicit knowledge explicit. It was almost trying to operationalize for myself what I did to make workshops successful. Workshop culture, still very practical book, but it's a higher level in terms of there's a bit more of a concept behind it. Of course, workshops are a big part of that, but the premise behind it is it's not just about running workshops with your teams more frequently. It's about using the principles of workshops and the feeling of workshops and the energy of workshops to create better team cultures. And yes, there are some very specific things that you do as facilitators, i.e., planning meetings and how you design and run those processes. But there's also something around how you show up as a facilitator. What are the skills? What's again, the mindset? What's the approach? What's the essence of a facilitator?
Hmm.
And how
Uh,
do you bring that to your teams?
a while back, you used the word interesting. You talked about it. If you want to live an interesting life, you're gonna have to create it. Um, I think what you're interested in is something that is so important, and people, I think, are often discouraged from pursuing their interests for one reason or another. Uh,
Mm,
can you take us back to a time when you were before you started your company and give me a sense of what you were doing
mm.
and that life that you felt like you didn't want, where you felt that point where you felt stuck or you felt like it wasn't really going your way?
It's so interesting because I don't know if it quite happened like that for me.
Ah,
I think that I always, for a long time, I'd had in my mind that at some point in my life I would start my own business. I think I even thought that before I went to university. Like I just had this idea that I would create something that would be outside of an organizer, outside of employment. I don't think I quite knew what it was, but I think I always knew that I would end up doing my own thing. And I think just before I started Bracket, I completed an MA probably about 2 or 3 years before I actually started my business. And in that MA, I actually did scope out the idea for my business Bracket
Mhm.
in that form. So even then, I knew that this was a path that I would take eventually. And in my role, it came to a natural ending in terms of there was a little bit of conflict with my then manager and it almost fizzled out. And because I had this business plan in the background, it was okay, so now's the time for me to do this. Um,
Tell us a little bit about that journey then. Like, when did you first, can you remember when you first started thinking about going?
yeah, as I mentioned, I've always been drawn to creativity and people that are creative. And I remember that a vision that I had for myself, I think this is even before I went to university, so I would have been maybe sort of around 18. I had a vision of creating some kind of platform that would bring artists together, some kind of platform that would support artists, maybe like a shared studio or something. So that was always in the back of my mind. I went to university, I studied fashion promotion and marketing. I switched from fashion design at that point, still thinking that I wanted to work in the fashion industry. I'm still very interested in creativity and yeah, creative entrepreneurship and the creative industries. I left my university, started working at a very small mail order company that platformed the work of small design and creative businesses. And so I guess that was my first way of starting to interact with people again that were doing their own thing. And then I went to, after that, I moved on to another organization. It was called Hidden Art. And this was specifically an organization that was set up, a not for profit organization that was set up to support artists and designer makers to develop their businesses. And so that's when I started just being creative, surrounded by people that were creators and were making money from their creativity in a sense. Although the reason the organization that I worked for existed was because they were creators, they were great at their creativity, they were great craftspeople, ceramicists and artists and textile artists and product designers and furniture designers, but they needed support on the business side of things. Yeah, and I think just being surrounded by people like that that were doing their own thing, they managed their own time. I mean, it was difficult, of course, it was hard for them. That's why we existed. But being surrounded by people that, again, were creating things out of nothing
Mm.
was quite inspiring for me. And that's what led me to do my MA, Master's Enterprise and Management for the Creative Arts, where the reason I did the MA was because I was surrounded by all these people and I knew that creative businesses had a different driver to traditional businesses. The reason that creatives set up businesses wasn't primarily to become the next millionaire. It was because they had something that they wanted to put out on the world and they wanted to use it to support themselves.
Mm.
And so I wanted to understand a little bit more about that. And that's why I did my master's degree, Enterprise and Management for the Creative Arts. What are the challenges that creative businesses face that are different to, I don't know, a widget business or a manufacturing business? And that's where I got the idea for Bracket. Bracket in its infancy, in its kind of early stage, was again another platform for showcasing creatives, showcasing creative freelancers, but using my MA is where I really got quite passionate about collaboration and what that could do. How can collaboration really help independent creative businesses to grow and flourish and exist and survive and become successful?
And there's so many, few things that I think are really interesting to unpack there. One is, it sounds like you've been continuously following your curiosity. When you talk about your research, you didn't talk about answers, you talked about questions. And I think that's, of course, that's what research is about. You also talked about surrounding yourself or being surrounded by creative people, people doing creative things. But you also said that wasn't the family you grew up in was not necessarily creative. So you didn't, somehow you had to find that, you had to seek that out. Um,
Yeah.
was there a time when when you had that creative feeling, but you felt lonely or you didn't feel like that community was around you? And how did you go about finding that or
Mm.
creating that for yourself?
These are good questions. Now, this has taken me back because I think my parents have always really encouraged me, not a traditional path, but there's been some kind of mystique around like what I wanted to do and the path that I wanted to take because it wasn't something that they were used to or they weren't familiar with. But I've always been encouraged to follow what I wanted to do. And I think I remember when I was younger, just I'm an only child as well. So I grew up as an only child. And so I think there was something for me in entertaining myself a lot. I used to read a lot. I probably used to draw a lot. I know that my mum used to come home with lots of magazines for
Mm.
me, possibly to keep me occupied or to feed my curiosity or to feed my creativity. So I think that loneliness, I don't know if I've ever experienced it because I was used to responding to that as an only child. I
Yeah,
was used to
you were used
creating
to
things
being
for
alone.
myself. Yeah, I was used to creating things to keep myself occupied, whether that was games, whether that was doing sketches, whether that was reading. I know my mum used to come home with loads of books for me. I had encyclopedias. My
Mm.
parents bought me a set of encyclopedias and I used to sit there and read through them. So I think that I was quite good at keeping myself occupied, and probably that's where that curiosity and that creativity emerged. And it's a question that I've never ever thought about. So
Mm.
yeah, thanks for asking.
But yeah, and yet you did seek out, socialize, make
Mm,
friends you did seek out a creative community at some point.
yeah,
You
yeah. Or did I seek it out, or did just emerge? I don't know
tell
if I
me.
actually, yeah, intentionally sought to be surrounded by creators, but doing fashion promotion and marketing, choosing that as a course. I guess I did. I chose that as a course, so I was surrounded by creativity then, and then choosing the jobs that I did early on in my career meant that I was surrounded by creators. So I guess that is seeking it out, unintentional, not realizing that I was though.
It's funny because when you're on your own, a lot of times you don't know what's possible. And
Mm,
you said earlier, you said you were surrounded by creative people who were doing creative things, starting companies, making products. So by the time you were ready to go out and start something, you had role models, mentors,
mm,
colleagues. You had these people around you that, or somehow when you're all alone, you don't even know what the options are, right? Put yourself into this situation where you're going to have inspiring things around you. I can feel this confidence, this creative confidence coming out of you. And I think you mentioned a few times that being around creative people is part of what inspires you and maybe gives you the confidence that you can do it for yourself, seeing other people do
mm.
it. How can you talk a little bit about how that happens?
Yeah, there's just a memory that I want to share with you that came up as you were speaking to me
Sure.
was I don't know if this happens in the US, in the UK, and I actually don't know if it happens anymore, but there's a point when we were at school, and I can't quite remember, I think we're probably around sort of 13, 14, where we do work experience. So
Hmm.
we take 2 weeks out where we go and work with a company to get exposure to what it's like to work. And I remember that all the options that were presented to me, I can't even remember what the options were presented to me. I didn't want to do that. I worked with my mum to seek out my own work experience, and I ended up working in a fashion company, which wasn't something that I asked for. And I did the research, and me and my mum worked together. We wrote the letters and we got myself a placement.
Oh,
So
so
there
it
was
wasn't on the
something there.
list. It wasn't
It
on the,
wasn't on the list.
you ordered off the menu.
I ordered off the menu, and I'm wondering what was it in me when I was that young that gave me the idea that was even possible. No one told me. I don't know if anyone told me that, no, you don't have to do the things on this list. But there was something there then, which was interesting. There was a
Yeah, well,
confidence
tell
there.
me more about that. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It must have to probably thank my parents for it again, in that you can do whatever you want to do, you can give it a go. Because they didn't discourage me. I was actively encouraged to see
But
different.
so you looked at the list. That was the starting point, right? You saw the list.
Yeah,
You had this, the school created this opportunity. You saw the list and you didn't like anything on the list. So
yeah.
none of
I must have
these,
been really annoying to my teachers, but
none of the things on this buffet table appeal to me.
yeah.
And you guess you must have gone home and had a conversation with your mom about it. If these are the options, I don't want to live or whatever. None of these, and you, but in order for you to feel that way, you could feel that way without knowing what you wanted.
Mm,
But you had some idea about fashion,
yeah.
and maybe that came from the magazines.
Probably the magazines. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And somehow you must have had a conversation. Do you remember it?
No, I
Yeah.
don't, what is in my head is I remember somehow probably looking through, I think I was probably at these old telephone directories. Don't know if you had
Yeah.
the yellow, we had the yellow
I
pages in the
remember. Yeah.
UK. Yeah. So I just remember going through the yellow pages, probably looking fashion design or fashion designers, and searching through ones that were probably in the local area, and then sending off letters to them.
Wow. That's first of all, that's very brave. That's very
Mm.
courageous. Second of all, I think it would take a lot, it takes a lot of confidence to do that. And so you must have had already a pretty strong idea of who you are as an individual and what you want.
Because I never ended up working in fashion. So yeah, at that point, I think I thought that I wanted to, but I didn't. I think through my early career, I realized, and possibly through university, I realized once I got to the other end of university that the fashion industry possibly wasn't quite for me, but the creativity element was there.
So you follow your curiosity, you follow your interest. Your interest takes you into a fashion studio at age
Yeah.
13 or 14. What was that like?
Oh, yeah, it was
Was
quite
it a
scary actually. Yeah, yeah, it was super
okay?
scary, daunting, but fun. Fun, yeah. What's it like for a 13, 14-year-old to be working in this kind of this fashion company? It was far away from home. I had to get the train there. Part of it was a little bit disappointing because whilst I did have some exposure to the fashion design department, they also put me on reception.
Hmm.
So I was actually doing proper work, and I must have done a good job because they asked me to come back a couple of months later to do the same job. But yeah, it was daunting and exciting. And I remember the fashion designer that I worked with at the time as well, who left that company, went on to be relatively high profile. So it was always nice looking back and seeing that I'd had that engagement when I was quite young.
So after that 2 weeks was over, you learned a bunch of things about what's possible. What was your takeaway after all that? Is that when you decided you didn't want to be in the fashion industry, or
No, yeah, no, it didn't come that early. It didn't come that early. You're asking really great questions, by the way, and really taking me back. I probably felt quite grown up because I had to do the commute, really. I think so a lot of my peers had done work experience that was quite local. They'd perhaps gone to work with their parents where I had to get up, go to a train. Like I had a proper job for 2 weeks,
yeah.
essentially. Yeah, so probably felt quite grown up, quite exposed to what working life was really like.
Yeah, and again, I said it feels like that's something that takes a lot of courage to stretch yourself and throw yourself into a situation where you really have no idea what
Mm.
is going to happen or could happen. And it seems like maybe is that a habit that you cultivate in yourself? Uh,
Yeah, I think probably more when I was younger.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But it led me to having that, I guess, that bold idea that at some point I would run my business, knowing that it would be something that I would do at some point, going to university when at the time a lot of my kind of close peers weren't doing that. And moving away from home to go to university as well, doing my master's degree, choosing a career path that perhaps wasn't as traditional as what perhaps had gone before in my family or what people knew. I had no idea that organisations like the organisations I worked for, Hidden Art, existed before I started working for an
Mhm.
organisation like Hidden Art. And so I guess there was that element of, yeah, that curiosity as well.
So talk to me about how you follow your curiosity and talk to me about the
Mm.
stepping stones that Steve Jobs has that commencement speech where he says you can't connect the dots looking forward, but you can connect them looking backward. Can you look
Yeah.
backward and connect the dots from your 14-year-old self to where you are today and how your curiosity and interest took you there?
Yeah, I could give you a sense of the actual path, and then I could give you a sense of like the essence, I think, what drove me. So I
Yeah.
think my career path was university, came out of university, did a short stint of work experience with actually it was a fashion company. And then I started working for an interiors company that supported designer makers. Or showcased designer makers or sold the work of designer makers. Then I started working for Hidden Art, which was the support organization for artists and designers. Then I did my MA, Enterprise and Management for the Creative Arts, which is where I got the early idea for Bracket and got very passionate about collaboration. Then I started working for another small contemporary arts gallery, spent a short time there. Then I started working at the University of the Arts London, running the Enterprise Centre, which was a centre that helped students and graduates develop business skills so that they could either become creative freelancers or set up their own creative businesses. And that was my last job before I left to set up Bracket. So there is a kind of thread there. But I think one of the things that I've learned about myself, and I think this is only something that's landed within the last couple of years, is that I'm driven by a sense of having to figure things out. And that's a kind of paradoxical place to be because the act of figuring things out, you're trying to get to a sense of certainty or a solution, which means you're not figuring out things anymore. But the minute you get to that solution of having figured it out, you then find the next thing that you need to figure out. Because actually, what drives me is the problem solving, not the solution, in a sense.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good description of any creative project. If you knew what the end result was going to look like, it wouldn't be a creative project. And whether it's writing a book or making a painting or designing clothing, I would think it doesn't matter. The essence of it is you have to figure it out, and that is the fun. It's sometimes I think of it like a creative project is like an adventure
Yeah,
because you can't have an adventure without a goal. You need something like find the lost ark or the treasure or whatever, but it's not about the goal, is it?
yeah. And I think that's the thing is the last couple of years, I've only just figured out that it's not about the goal because for me, before I realized this, the problem solving was about me trying to get to a place where I had it figured out. But then realizing when I got to that place, I was like, oh, now I need the next thing.
The
Okay.
solution to every problem is in the next problem, right?
Yeah, yeah. So
Well,
maybe that's something that's been a thread that I hadn't realized until very recently that's been a thread throughout my life of stepping into the unknown because I want to somehow solve some kind of problem. Like you said, when I do my research, it was questions that I was asking rather than having a finished product there. Yeah, subconsciously, maybe I'm just asking questions all the time.
that's wonderful. It's like this, I think it's not always true that at the end of every creative project, you have a new question or a new problem. Sometimes you make something you feel pretty good about and you put it out there, and the next thing is not so clear. But one thing that's I'm struck by it is whenever you talk up all the stuff that we've talked about, you you talk a lot about not just creativity, but the business of creativity.
Mm,
Like when you're working with enterprises, or when you even your first idea for Bracket, it was about bringing business thinking into the creative world. Or so how do those things fit together for you, business and creativity?
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. So having been surrounded by people that are creative producers, I have, although I've never seen myself as a creative producer, I've never said that I'm not creative. And I think that that's what's interesting. That's what's been interesting for me. I think I'm an actual project manager. And I think that's probably sort of one of the things that I have done throughout my career without necessarily calling myself a project manager, but I'm always very interested in sort of when there's an idea, how do you turn it into something tangible? How do you make it happen? And I think that's always been my pull, seeing this creativity around me. It's okay, so how do you push that forward? How do you make something of that? And I think that's a skill that I've cultivated um, over time, which is that translation of ideas, that translation between creativity and productivity, I think. And so I've always seen myself, if you think about maybe creativity and productivity along a continuum, creativity at one end, productivity on the other end, I see myself in the middle. So if you have sort of someone who's purely creative looking up the continuum at me, I possibly am more kind of business minded than they are. But if you have someone who's at the complete other end, which is a business that perhaps wouldn't see themselves as creative, maybe an accountancy firm or lawyers, for example, they might look down the other end, from the other end of the continuum, and look at me and think, oh, that person's a little bit more creative than we are, or creative in that sense. So I almost see myself as a translator between those two worlds. In fact, that was literally the first idea of Bracket. It was like, how do I bring those two worlds together? And I'm sitting in the middle there. I can speak the language of creatives and I can also speak the language of business. So I can be that translator between the two of them.
You've written a book. That's a creative act.
Mm.
And I think starting a business is absolutely a creative act. You're creating, again, something from nothing. Can you talk a little, your idea, one thing that I think I got from your story is that your idea for what you wanted with Bracket has changed. There's been a lot of figuring out and change in that story. Can you talk a little bit about how you got from
Yeah.
I'm going to do this thing supporting creatives to I'm going to bring workshop culture into companies?
Yeah, yeah. I think at the beginning of my business journey, even though it's something that I always saw myself doing, there was a lot of naivety there, and the project manager mindset, and also having worked for. I hadn't worked in the corporate world before. I'd worked at university. I'd worked for a not-for-profit organization. I'd worked for a small business. I had an idea, but the selling side of it was something that I had no experience of whatsoever. So even though everything was in place, I had a network of creatives, I had the systems in place, I had the project management skills. I knew that if someone handed Bracket or me the opportunity of a project, it would be delivered perfectly. But getting those projects in and speaking to new clients was something that was completely new to me. So the first kind of few years of my business, I was doing other things. I was doing some teaching and I was doing some other workshops with organizations whilst I was getting this idea started. But that was actually quite difficult for me. I had this idea, but I couldn't sell it. And one of the things that I always did when I did bring teams together was I would get everyone into a room and I'd run a brainstorming session. And I didn't know that facilitation was a skill that people would pay for. But someone said to me, what you're doing in bringing those people together and taking them through a process where they're generating ideas together and they're coming up with a project or a collaboration, that's something that people will pay for. So I started to pursue that. I didn't realize that for me, facilitation was just something that you did to get to an end result. I didn't realize it was a service that people would actually be interested in buying. And I guess the first iteration of Bracket was this agency of bringing creatives together to collaborate on projects. The second iteration was this facilitation agency where people would try the usual stuff, very inspired by game storming in my early days. People would bring me in as a facilitator to facilitate workshops for their teams. And I think one of the things that happened for me, because I've always been interested in the team side of things and the collaboration side of things, although I loved the facilitation and it energized me, I'd get to the end of a workshop and I'd feel slightly, it'd be a great workshop and I'd be happy with the results and the team would be happy, but there'd be something missing for me in terms of, well, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next with this team? How are they going to take these ideas forward? And that's when I started sort of piecing it together and thinking, actually, they've hired me in to do this one-day workshop. They're collaborative in this workshop. They're getting great ideas. They're working really well together. It's stopping at the end of my time with them together. But what if I could help them continue that feeling? What if I could help them keep that momentum going? And that was the early conception of workshop culture.
So how did you get from you said you had this idea, but you couldn't sell it. You were with this, you had this organization, you was ready to go. You had everything you needed except customers, right?
Yeah.
So how did you go from that to help me understand how you ended up doing facilitation, or was that something that you said you had a lot of things going on? How did that happen?
So the facilitation was something that I would do as part of bringing teams together. So there were a couple of projects that we were able to secure. And when a client came, there was one specific project that I'm remembering with a law and accountancy firm that I still have conversations with. And they were looking for a marketing solution. So I brought together a team of freelancers and we did a brainstorming session. This is the client's problem. These are the skills that we have in the team. What can we produce for them? And it was less the result that we got as a team for the client and more the process that some clients were interested in. So they looked at me as the person that was bringing those people together and said, that thing that you're doing, actually, you could come in and do that for our teams within our companies. And that was a massive light bulb for me because I didn't realize it was something that people wanted, needed, and would pay for. I did some facilitation for free for some events and some companies because I didn't realize it was something that people would pay me for. And once I built my confidence in developing that as a service, then that's how I reinvented myself and Bracket as a facilitation consultancy or agency.
That's really interesting though, because you stumbled on something valuable. You stumbled on something that, and accidentally or tangentially, that someone said, "Oh, this is really valuable." But you wouldn't have got there if you hadn't been going down this other path, right?
Absolutely.
That's what I mean by the connecting the dots and paying attention and noticing. So you're not going to find anything you're not going to find treasure on the beach unless you're out there with a metal detector or walking around. So
right.
you had to get out into unknown territory before you're even able to stumble on that.
And I think the same is for workshop culture as well. Where did I get the idea for workshop culture? It was running these workshops and being exposed to that and getting a sense of what teams needed and what would be useful and valuable to them. And I could only do that by being in that environment of facilitating workshops.
So is that the art of the possible then? You think you have something you want and you get as close as possible to what you want and you see what else you bump into while you're out there. And then you just keep following the things that are most interesting until you get.
Yeah, I think that's it. Because the thing is that sometimes the thing that you want isn't the thing that you end up with. If I think about the first iteration, the first idea that I had for Bracket, that's obviously not where I am now. But like you say, if I hadn't embarked on, that's what I wanted. That's the vision that I had for my business 20 years into the future. But if I hadn't started on that path, then this book wouldn't
Right.
exist.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think so paying attention to what you're interested in
Mm,
and having the courage to throw yourself into those situations without knowing what's
yeah.
going to happen. And then I think selling is an important maybe thing to talk about. I had a mentor of mine once said, nothing happens till somebody sells something,
Yeah.
which in a way is true. But in another sense, it's not just like you had something, maybe you could have figured out how to sell it, but what you actually found was a different kind of value than what you had. In other words, you didn't you might have had a red bike and you're trying to sell a red bike, but when
Mm,
someone says they're interested in the wheels, you were, let's say, flexible enough to recognize that and think about
mm.
that.
And also needed to make money.
Yeah, but that is every creative person. There's no guarantee in the creative life, right? Of
Right.
any kind. And there's a lot of luck involved. Everybody has to survive.
Mm,
I think in a way, that's a great constraint that we all have to deal with, right? We have to,
right.
if we didn't have, to me, that's a good way that reality gets us focused on what are you doing for anybody else? It's great that you are pursuing your interest in doing all the things you want, but what about what other people want? That's kind
Mhm.
of that's what and an idea, but you couldn't sell it, but then you found something that people wanted to buy. I think there's something in there about customers come out of conversations and interactions. And in a way, you had a conversation, and you can have conversations with things and processes and other stuff, but in a way, you were okay. You proposed a offer,
Mm,
and then you got a counter offer.
yeah. And I think there's also something in, I don't know if I would have recognized facilitation as a skill on my own. Someone had to point that out to me because I think this is also something a lot of creative people experience is that the things that perhaps come naturally to them, they don't realize how valuable that is to other people. And so for me, facilitation, it just made sense. There was nothing, I hadn't trained in facilitation. For me, I wanted a team, the desire was for the team to collaborate. From my knowledge of creativity and also my experience in working with creatives, but also the research that I'd done, I knew that as someone that was supporting that process, being a um, autocratic leader would not have worked. Creativity needs space. And so for me, that facilitative process just made sense. That it would not have worked if I'd brought that team together and been very specific about what I wanted each person to do. And I'd been very micromanaging or controlling. I just knew that that wasn't how creativity worked. And for me, it just made facilitation made sense. But it was someone else that pointed out to me that I was a good facilitator. I would not have recognized that myself because it was just something that I did. Very similar to your path, Dave, in the sketching that you did and the illustrations. It was just something that you did.
Hmm.
And was there a point when it wasn't even that you thought everybody could do it, but you didn't really land for you that other people couldn't do it in the way that you did. And I think that's the same thing with facilitation for me.
Yeah, this is back to that idea of this customer creating conversations. You go out and you do things, and like when I started my company, Explain, I thought we're going to do infographics and we'll go find the expert and we'll sit in the room with the expert and we'll draw the thing, the process or the system or whatever. And that was, again, it was very naive of me to think that there would be some expert sitting inside a company that understood the whole system. There wasn't. And Again, the conversation, you insert yourself into a problem space with a solution, but your solution doesn't work, and then you have to figure it out. I think there's something about that conversation that happens not just with words, but with actions and offers and how you come to understand value. And I think we all know we all have people in our lives who have trouble listening. And that is not uncommon in the creative world too, right? The creative people can, being creative does not automatically make you a good listener. And I think this is where the business and the creative come together, is that conversation that obviously it's great if you can be paid while you're figuring things out. And if you're creating value while you're figuring things out, why not? But I think maybe you have also had this, occasionally you have this, you bump into this kind of genius customer who understands because they understand their organization or their
Mm.
problem better than you do. They understand and they have enough of a sense of what you can bring to it that they can tell you more about your value than you ever could have imagined.
Mm.
This conversation you're talking about where you just weren't thinking about facilitation as a product or
Yeah.
a service. And I never, same here, I was an artist. I wasn't trying, I became a facilitator out of necessity.
Mm.
And game storming was the result of figuring it out
Right.
in the crucible of the real world. And as we all know, no plan will ever survive contact with reality. And
Absolutely.
that's the challenge. And that's always the challenge in facilitation. You never know
Mm.
who's going to be in the room, what's going to happen. Talk to me a little bit about, I'm sure it was not so simple as, okay, I started here and had a conversation and then I had a new website the next day. How did you get from project manager for creative projects to workshop culture?
Mm. Mm. So I think it's a deep interest and passion for collaboration. Like I think that has been the thread from the start of this journey all the way through. I truly believe that how we interact and work together can make a difference. And I also believe that doesn't just happen on its own. And so I think the learning that I did, even I think even being honest with myself in that when I started out in my journey of facilitation and even the sort of the creative projects and the collaboration there, I don't know that I was as aware as I am now about the dynamics of it, the human dynamic element of it, like the social psychology element of it. From a project manager point of view, it was almost like it was a puzzle to me. Bring the people together, do the thing, and out comes the product. And I think what I've learned through that process of facilitation is how nuanced and how complex human behavior is, particularly when we're interacting with each other. And I think that's the thing that I'm figuring out now. And that's what really drives me. Again, we had this conversation before, but the quote that you mentioned, I mentioned to you that I have an anxiety between our need for collaboration and our ability to do it. I think the gap is growing even wider. And I feel that we are not, as humans, evolving at the speed of technology. And you told me about that amazing quote, which I have has been living in my head since. The problem with humanity is we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And that for me that's the problem that I'm trying to solve now. I don't think it's ever going to be solved, but that's a massive driver for me. It's like, why is that? Why is it that we're so clever that we can develop this amazing technology that does these, it performs miracles, but yet our emotional intelligence, we haven't figured out how to
Yeah.
really evolve that yet.
It's so interesting. You say that collaboration is this deep interest for you, and yet, as an only child, so good at amusing yourself. It's curious, interesting. So how do you get from you can't write a book without being able to focus and spend time with yourself and
Mm,
collect your thoughts and create. But how do you strike a balance between your need for solitude,
yeah,
which I'm sure is there, and this deep
100%.
passion for collaboration? How do you
Oh,
balance those in your life?
gosh, this is a big question. And these are questions that I don't think I've ever been asked or encouraged to think about. But I wonder if for me, because I have spent so much time in solitude and I really do value, I'm the classic introvert. I am, like, I really do need time on my own. But I wonder if there is a scientific element to it for me. It is, I obviously do collaborate with people and I work with people, but then I'm able to distance myself.
There's the journey and there's the goal, and those things are related. And of course, you want to enjoy the journey and you want to be working towards a goal that is exciting and interesting to you. How do you think solitude and collaboration play together, or what's a good way for them to play together in your
Yeah, I
experience?
mean, yeah, I think they play together really well. And I think that's sometimes a misconception about collaboration, that it is about people working together all of the time and being very enmeshed. And I don't think that's what it is at all. It's about coming together. You might create a collective vision. What is it that we want to achieve? Are we all aligned? Then you go away and you think, okay, so how do I individually contribute to that? You may develop ideas on your own, and then you come back together as a team and you play around with those ideas and mix them together and mesh them. And I think that togetherness and that separation is I think it was Adam Grant actually that spoke about some research at Stanford about the intermittent collaboration, that
Hmm.
collaboration is done in bursts. I think the research paper is about newsrooms. I think I will find the link for you, but the research states that the best collaboration is bursting. You have these moments where we come together and there's kind of all of that energy, and then the team kind of disperses, just does their own thing, and there's that alone working, maybe even async working, and then we have the synchronous time together, but it's not us all working together at the same time. And we need that. And I think also
Right.
I was reflecting on this as well. Sort of the thing between collaboration and solitude is that I think the problem with collaboration is that word is often used so loosely, and people use the word collaboration when it's not truly a collaboration. And that's when we really truly are thinking about the true version of collaboration, the true meaning of collaboration, then we are a lot more discerning about when we use that word and the collaborations that we enter into.
Why do you think people, give me an example of what you mean when people say that when they're talking about collaboration, but they're not talking about collaboration?
Yeah, I guess the one that just comes to my mind is maybe like brand partnerships. I'm collaborating with this brand, and actually, not the brand is paying you as an influencer, the brand is paying you to create some material. That's not a true collaboration. I see
Hmm.
a true collaboration as people, I think it was Linda Hill in Collective Genius that said this is that people are the raw ingredients. And so when you bring those raw ingredients together, you're creating a meal that none of those raw ingredients could create by themselves. And so for me, a true collaboration is when you can't really see the individual contributions. Like, you know that people were involved in creating that product, but you can't splice out, oh, I did that bit and that person did that bit. It's all completely mixed, almost like a soup, right? You can't
Hmm.
pull out the carrots and the squash and the onions. It's just all blended together.
And yet you do have collaborations, like an author will write a book and you can read an acknowledgement of all these different people who
Mm,
helped or had a part in it, where you can have I don't know if you call it a collaboration, but where people are helping each other. Well, they're working on their individual thing, but they're helping each
mm.
other. I don't know if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if I'd call that a collaboration. I'd call it maybe sort of contribution in some way. And maybe I'm being sort of collaboration diehard here, and I'm being very specific about the language. I think because I've spent so much time in collaboration, and I think we've gone through a wave actually, because when I started out in this area, collaboration was very much a buzzword. I worked in the non-for-profit education sector, and collaboration was just a thing that you put on all funding applications to get the funding, and it wasn't quite a collaboration. And so I think we've gone through that phase of it being a buzzword, and we're starting to come out the other end where we're starting to think, okay, so what does true collaboration really mean and really feel like?
Interesting. So creative work, we talked about this a little bit. Then there's a journey in the creative work or a daily routine, your habits and routines and the things that you do. But creative work also is about generating something that's never been done before. Are there recipes or creative habits or practices that you find helpful? A
Yeah.
recipe generally is something that's designed to get the same result every time, but if you want a different result every time,
Mm,
are there
yeah.
recipes for that, at least in your
If there's
mind?
recipe, yeah, I don't know if there's, if I would call them one thing that's just come to mind. I think this is the thing is that you're always experimenting and discovering new things about how you can be creative. Even before we jumped on the call, I've been reflecting on how at this moment of time I'm able to allocate different themes to different days. And Thursday is my kind of more creative day,
Hmm.
where I can do a bit more writing, because I know that if I'm doing other work such as client work, or I've got a workshop to prepare for, or I've got people to follow up on, it's a completely different space. And it takes me a while. And I forget this every time I start, and I probably need to put a post-it note on my computer, but I forget that to get into the creative headspace, it takes me a few rounds, and I feel like it engages a different part of your thinking to be in that creative space. Personally, it's very difficult for me to write in between tasks. I do need a space and a stretch of time where I can. And I think this is the thing about creativity as well, is that on the surface, it feels very inefficient because of that time
Hmm.
that it takes to perhaps get into the space, the time that it takes to create something that feels that it has a shape. And this is why I think we have a problem with creativity in the business world, because the business world is biased towards productivity and ticking tasks off and doing things, whereas creativity needs a lot more space. And so we struggle with that. And because I feel guilty when I'm writing and it takes me half a day to even brainstorm a blog post, I feel guilty. I feel like I should be working on other things, but
Hmm.
that's the process.
Yeah. Do you have a theme for every day of the week or just
I
Thursdays?
try to. No, Monday to Wednesdays at the moment allocated to client work. Thursdays is more my content, yeah, writing day. And then Friday is more my admin operations finance day.
Hmm.
When it works out like that. That's the ideal, right?
Yeah. So you must hate Fridays then.
I don't mind them actually. I
Yeah.
actually don't mind them. Yeah, yeah, they're usually a little bit slower. That I tell you what I like about Fridays is that they are often tasks that don't require a lot of brain power, because the one they once they're done, it's I have to do a backup of my website, or I have to pay these invoices, or I have to make these invoices out. There's no kind of right or wrong to they just are done, but you can't
Hmm.
there's no uncertainty around them. They're either done or they're not. Whereas I guess the other days of my week are a lot more. I have to make more decisions, and I have to think a lot more deeply, and I have to be creative. And even though I'm a big fan of creativity, the creative process is hard. And there's no right answer. Those are the Monday to Thursday, all of those tasks are things that I could be working on forever.
Do you have on Thursdays, your creative day, do you have any rituals or
I
things that
don't.
you do to get started to relax or decompress or get yourself into a creative mindset?
I've started to organise. So I'm quite good at capturing ideas now. So I have different documents for maybe LinkedIn post or blog post or newsletter ideas. Either email myself if I have an idea when I'm out, and it will go into that document, or it goes straight into that document. So those are the bases I work from and with. I know that all of my ideas are in one place. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's part of the creative process I know is getting ideas out of your head and somewhere where you can
Hmm.
start to make sense of them. which is again the visual thinking.
Yeah, I call that my piling cabinet.
Right. Filing cabinet, love that.
I would love to talk a little bit about intentionality and
Mm,
showing up for yourself, showing up for other people.
mm.
Do you have thoughts about int how you are intentional about how you show up for things?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Again, one thing comes into my mind, and it's something that I've been doing regularly since I definitely know that the first time I did it was 2017, which is I call it a weekly meeting with myself.
Hmm.
And every week, without fail, the only time that I've not done this is when I've been on holiday, and I haven't needed to do it. But every week, without fail, I will journal around three areas. What did I do? What happened? What did I learn? How am I feeling? And what am I thinking about? And so I'll spend time journaling around those. And then
What did I
I'll,
do? What happened?
yeah, what did I do? What happened? What did I learn? And how am I feeling? And what am I thinking about?
That's nice.
And so I'll spend some time journeying around those so that I can capture the, yes, I did this. And then I'm trying to really deepen any knowledge, any learning or any reflections that have happened during the week to see how do I learn from them. And then I do my to-do list. So I have all of my tasks in specific places, either in Notion if it's a client project, or I have an Excel spreadsheet that logs all of my own business tasks, and I'll go through those methodically, write out all the to-dos for the week, and then I'll sit there and I'll plan based now on these daily themes what I'm going to do on what day. So before the week starts, I have my to-do list for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And for me, that has been amazingly transformational in terms of overwhelm. I might have a lot to do, but I know exactly what I need to do. Like I touch wood, I don't think I've missed any big task or anything has dropped off that has been vital or important. Um, Everything lives somewhere, and I'm quite intentional about picking those up and making sure that I plan my week out. And what that does for me, I think I've spoken about this before in other podcasts, but what that does for me is that when I get up in the morning, I then don't have to make the decision about what I need to do that day. I've already done it. And so that barrier of what do I need to do today or what do I feel like doing is just completely gone. It doesn't matter what you feel like doing. You said on Sunday that you've got to do this today because based on everything else that you're doing, this is the best day to do it.
So is Sunday when you have your meeting with
Yeah,
yourself?
yeah, yeah.
Is that this, you do that when first thing you get up or anytime on Sunday or?
Anytime, yeah. Sometimes it varies. Mostly Sunday is my day for kind of winding down and getting ready for the week. Sometimes it happens on a Friday afternoon, very rarely. Sometimes if I'm doing something on a Sunday, then it will happen on a Saturday. I don't like doing it on a Monday morning because for me, it's a couple of hours really.
Mhm.
It's 2 hours well spent, but for me to do that on a Monday morning, then it's thrown my week out in a sense. So I try not to do it on a Monday morning. I like to have it done before I start the week. And I think that's probably the biggest example that I have of intentionality in my life. It's a routine now that I do. And for me, it sets up my week. That 2 hours is so worth it.
Nice. So what else, what haven't we talked about or what else would you like to talk about? We've got, and the art of the possible. We want to share with people anything that you've learned about generating opportunities for yourself and like moving to the next level, whatever that means.
Yeah, I think when you run your own business or when you work for yourself, you learn a lot about yourself. And I think particularly the weekly meetings, what that does for me, it's not just about planning my week, it is a space for reflection. And I think that reflection has really helped me to understand um, what I find easy, what I find challenging. I think that in the workspace, we don't necessarily, in the workplace when we're employed, we don't necessarily have permission to do that kind of stuff on work. Even I do it on a Sunday, which is kind
Mhm.
of ironic. I work for myself and
Yeah.
I still do it on a Sunday. But yeah, that time to reflect, because creativity, productivity is so personal. And yeah, we can take inspiration from other people's routines, but I think ultimately we have to find our own. Um, I've got a friend who's written a book. Her and her partner wrote the book Written, which is all about writing habits. And there's so much information out there saying that you need to write daily, write a little bit every single day. I find that doesn't work for me. Like, I am a batch writer, and they talk about this in their book Written. There's different types of creativity styles, and you have to find what works for you. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. Give yourself the space and time to learn about how you get things done, and the things that you need in order to be creative and to think about what's next.
That's really interesting. And I definitely agree with it. I feel like there are creative routines, creative habits, creative processes. There are so many, and we can learn so much from hearing other people or reading about people we admire, how they do their work. But ultimately, if you want your work to be original in the result, you probably have to find something original in the process that generates that result, right? So
Mm.
finding your own way, finding your own path, that to me feels like it's a really important part of the creative life.
Mhm.
Uh,
Can
Back
I
to
just add
the,
something else into that,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is that's also a principle for teams, right? Teams have to find their own
Mm,
individual, unique way of working as a team, because that essentially, one, you can't copy another team because your team is unique. Secondly, it can create a competitive advantage for you as a team. If you do create your own ways of working, you're going to get your own results out of that
mm.
because nobody else is working like you. And so, yeah, I think it applies to individual and teams.
That's pretty much where game storming came from, is figuring it out as you go and
Mm,
developing those processes. And for me, that was about just figuring out an extremely flexible, modular, kind of dynamic way of working.
mm. I love that. Love the sort of the modules are all there, but you fit it together in your own way. And the way that you fit it together is going to be your way, not anybody else's. Love that.
Plus, and a lot of
Mm,
them have a lot of room for improvisation, riffing.
mm,
For me, the purpose of that, what was really useful about that was having this thing, this whole set of kind of components in my head without any, once you've absorbed them and integrated them, then it allows you to improvise in a lot more different kinds of ways. Do you ever, do you have a, you talked a little bit about your weekly rhythm. Do you have a yearly rhythm? Do you have time, set aside time for, do you schedule a retreat for yourself or, oh,
You know
uh,
what? I don't. I wouldn't say it's a retreat. I do that thinking. I think for me, I don't do those kind of personal offsites in that big way. I do have planning sessions, but I also find because I have that habit of doing it quite regularly, I'm already always thinking about the bigger picture. It's just, yeah, it becomes much more regular than a kind of one-off or a once yearly thing. But saying that, it is on my list of things to do this week to schedule in my annual planning meeting for myself.
awesome. Okay, so you're basically, your Sunday meeting with yourself is your big picture
Partly.
reflection.
Yeah.
It's a way that you use to navigate life, career,
Hmm.
how you feel, what
Yeah.
you want. I think checking in with your feelings is so important, especially in the creative life.
100%.
You have to, because you have to sustain your energy over a long haul. And if you're not,
Absolutely.
if you're not doing something that is making you feel good,
Mm,
then probably just doing more of it is not going to make you feel any better.
absolutely. Yeah.
I just saw your post this morning on big picture thinking. So
Oh, yeah.
I gotta ask you to talk a little bit about big picture thinking.
Okay.
What is
Yeah.
it? What do you think of? What does it mean to you?
So I think I came up with this term. I actually think I remember the first post that I wrote about this, which was probably actually, was it 2014? It might have been a little bit later than that. But I it was around this time of year, and you just have that feeling around September where you think, oh, we're not quite at the end of the year, but I'm already thinking about next year. And it just dawned on me, you've got a lot of information behind you of how the year's gone, and still 3 months to plan for the next. I came up with this phrase, September is for strategy. And it's a good exercise to do with your team because as a leader, you're not the one that has all the information in your head. Your team have learned and tried things out. Things haven't worked, things have worked. And we're all racing so quickly through our to-do list that sometimes we don't stop and share that information and think about what we've learned and how that can help us to move to the next stage. And I think even the first post that I wrote, I said strategy, developing a strategy is it's a science and an art. So it is a mixture of data, but then there's also intuition and knowledge and wisdom that you draw on as a team to build what you're going to work on next. And there's so many reasons why big picture thinking, I just think, is such a great exercise. It's about the team learning together. It's an opportunity to pause and say, this is where we've got to, this is what we've learned. It's an opportunity to dream about the future. It's an opportunity to think like possibility, and it's an opportunity to kind of look outside. So I say it's about looking back, looking outside, looking forward. And having that conversation with your team not only gives you information that you can use in the business, but actually it's quite a motivating and energizing activity because, again, we are also busy in our head down. Sometimes I work with teams a lot that are so focused on their daily tasks that they get overwhelmed because they can't see how what they're doing on a daily basis feeds into the bigger picture. And we all know how important kind of having a sense of purpose is in our work. This is one of those exercises which starts to bring some of that. It just hits so many boxes. It's about thinking about purpose and like what are we doing as a team? Why do we exist? What do we want to do together as a team? What have we learned? Learning from each other, looking at what's possible, generating ideas, energizing. There's just so much in there that I think these big picture thinking sessions really do hit. So I just think it's a great, around this time of year, I think is a really great time to do it.
Is this something that you do personally or that you can do as an individual?
I think so. Yeah, why not? I think absolutely. It's, as I say, it's those kind of 3 sections looking back. What have I learned? What hasn't gone well? What have what have I enjoyed? What's worked well? Looking out, what's inspiring me right now? What's happening in the world, in the industry, in the field that I work in, and looking forward. If I could do anything that I wanted to do, what would that be? What are the things that I wanted to get to that I haven't got to this year? When I bring all of that stuff together, looking back and looking outside, how do I combine those in interesting ways to create something new? So yeah, I love it as a personal exercise as well.
Interesting. What else would you like to talk about?
I think that I guess the what I'm curious about is also very similar to what you said about the big picture thinking session workshop culture. Is there a side of that could be applied individually? So the 5 elements around alignment, cohesion, communication, design, and change. Of course, like the cohesion stuff is about multiple people together, but actually, if you set a vision for yourself in terms of what you want to achieve, and you distill that into behaviors and habits that you then need to um, do or be in order to achieve that goal. And then you keep checking in with yourself and think about how do I work and does the way that I'm working now match what I need to achieve? And you're having those reflection conversations with yourself, designing rituals and routines and checking in with your habits. Maybe there is an application to the individual as well as the team.
Yeah, I was reflecting this morning on how do we learn? And there's so many aspects to it. But I think sometimes we learn by watching other people or
Mm,
mimicking. Just, okay, that works, seems to work. I'll try that. Sometimes we learn by doing stuff,
mm,
copying people. Okay, that watching someone in art school, they had a thing that they called, I think it was called the studio approach, but it was like
mm,
watch the teacher do it, then try doing it yourself, then try teaching
mm,
it. And by teaching it, you are learning to articulate what you're learning with your body. Um,
Right.
but I also think we're in such a world today, we don't know what the jobs are going to look like in the future.
Mm,
We don't know if any job, what jobs are going to be there, or what work is going to need to be done in the future. Well, we have all this stuff with AI and everything. I think it's more and more incumbent on us to figure it out. Just walk into this uncertainty and figure it out. And for me, it seems a lot of that learning is coming from reflection, either by
yeah.
yourself, reflecting with other people in conversation. And I've noticed that, like in the last year or so with the School of the Possible, I've noticed that it's the face-to-face conversations where that sense making happens, and that where that it's the thing that moves everything forward. And you can go back and forth, and you can post stuff on LinkedIn and you can comment, but generally that stuff is very superficial, very surface,
Yeah.
very pretty shallow. And people, I think they don't make decisions, they don't actually grow that way.
Mm, mm, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I remember being really struck one time. I was having dinner in Italy with two Italian people, and the way that they ate, we didn't talk about other things. We talked about the food
Right.
and tastes of the food,
Mm,
what this reminds me of and what this makes me think of, and how. So the whole meal was like a combination of sensory experience and collective
mm,
sense making. If you've been to a wine tasting, people will start trying to find words to describe the taste that they're feeling, and they'll use words for things that you'd never even eat, earthy or chalky, things that you
yeah.
don't necessarily eat, but those will be words that come out. And I think that is a part, to me, what happens, that process is a process of finding words for things that you don't have words for, or finding ways to, it's almost like you learn more, you learn about yourself by looking in the mirror. You can reflect
Mm,
with yourself, but you can also reflect with others. So what does that mean? What is this person working on? How are they
mm,
doing it? And how might that apply to stuff that I'm going through? I just feel reflecting our experiences to each other, that they start to have meaning
yeah.
for
Yeah.
ourselves.
And I think that everything that I'm hearing you speak is, again, it's something that I feel that you're just so good at, which is encouraging people to stop and slow down
Mm,
and like really think a bit more deeply about what they're experiencing, what they're learning. I see that, I feel that in your LinkedIn posts all the time. There is a just this stop. Yeah, it is.
that's
It
a
just feels like,
beautiful reflection. That's a lovely reflection. I do think, yeah, there's, because if you slow down when you're rushing, you don't really, there's a lot of things you miss. And
mm,
you, it's easy, very easy in our globe. Culture is multifaceted, but it's really easy in the work culture
yeah,
to just forget that you have a body, like you're just a head on a stick, and like walking
yeah,
around and turning off. People talk about turning off
mm,
their emotional self, but how you're feeling, that's a really, it's
mm,
almost like a gas tank or a
yeah,
fuel, like the battery thing on your phone. It's, if you're not checking in on your battery, on your
mm,
energy, I think you burn out, you go dead, you run out of
absolutely.
gas, whatever.
It just popped into my mind. I was actually just because I was looking, I've been writing today, so I've been looking at all sort of little snippets of blog posts or LinkedIn posts that I wanted to write. And there was a piece in a blog post that I wrote a while back around rethinking efficiency. And there's a interview, someone from Harvard Business Review interviews Seinfeld, and they're talking about efficiency.
Mm,
And the interviewer asks him, "Did you need to be more efficient in your process? Do you think someone like someone from McKinsey could have come to help you?" And he's, "Are they creative?" And the person was like, "No." And he's, "I don't need them. Like the efficient way in terms of what I'm doing is the wrong way. Like it is hard. What we're doing is hard. It is going to take a long time. So I don't need efficiency." And I just thought that was just such
mm,
a great answer of kind of basically say like efficiency isn't the holy grail, um, even though it is put up in the business world. And we really do in order to develop anything of quality, we do need to stop and think and pause and reflect and have conversations. And my big question is like, how do we create workplaces that allow for more of that and give ourselves permission to do that? Because the race, what's happening with AI and stuff, it's almost like a race to the bottom in terms of how much time people are spending on, not everybody, some people are seeing it as a massive shortcut to write content, and we're going to have content that just looks and sounds the same. But yeah, where do
It's
we
so
go?
interesting. You think about you brought up Seinfeld, and that makes me think of stand-up comedy. And there is something so amazing to me about that these people who do this, they show up,
Mm,
they don't have any, usually they don't have any props, they're not musicians, they don't have a lot of equipment. They just stand up there
mm,
and talk for 90 minutes. Think about the courage that takes, or the
yeah.
pressure, because if nobody laughs, then it's no
Mm,
good, right? So
yeah.
they have to, you think about the social aspect of that and figuring out what's funny, what's not funny,
Mm,
what's too far.
yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, there's this whole, Seinfeld is active in this, and so is Dave Chappelle. But you talk about, comedians talk about cancel culture a lot these days, because
Mm,
the the purpose of comedy, a lot of comedians feel, is to push
yeah.
boundaries, is to stretch, is to create discomfort.
Mm,
Uh,
mm,
and yet there's all this social pressure these days, and they're feeling it.
yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
like it's interesting on two levels. So interesting to me. At one level, it's okay. How do you do that? Number one,
Mm,
just yeah, they can get it. They could get on a plane with nothing, no, not even luggage you could imagine, right? And just
yeah.
some little index cards or whatever. They get up, they entertain
Mm,
for
mm,
90 minutes. What could we learn from them about
yeah.
how to change meetings or workshops or culture?
Mm,
Usually when people get up, and they give a talk, they have slides, but the people who don't need any slides are so powerful.
yeah. I can't, I could never do a talk without slides. It is my memory.
I
But I
know.
mean, also interesting the thing around the comedy and the cancel culture. I find that quite interesting because for me, this is again, we're all feeling it. This isn't, it's almost like an opportunity potentially to innovate, right? That's not going away. So if those are now your new parameters or your new constraints, what does comedy look like when you are, maybe there's a redefinition of comedy. It's the same that we're all having to do with our work, right? With AI, it's not going away. As much as I'd like the world to slow down and say, no, hold on, everyone, what are we doing with this? Let's really think this through. That's not happening. And so I do at some point have to think about how AI is going to affect my work. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's going to affect my work. So I do, maybe there's some innovation, there's an innovation opportunity there for me. And this is what I say,
Yeah.
say with teams as well. There's problems in your work. There's some things that are outside of your control, and there's no point in putting energy. You can complain about them, but they're ultimately not going to change. So, where is best for you to put your energy in things that you can change? Are there things that exist in your environment, again, that maybe you have to put a reframe around? Because, again, it's a characteristic of your work, or it's a characteristic of how the industry is going. And therefore, the conversation is, okay, how do we adapt to this? And what do we need to do differently? Because as much as we would like to, we can't change that thing that is happening. So we either need to reframe or find a new solution.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And still on the topic of the role of comedy and the comic,
Mm,
part of what, part of how I see their role in society of a comedian is they're supposed to poke at our
mm,
blind spots. They're
right.
supposed to point and say the emperor has no
Mm,
clothes on. They're supposed to, that's part of the job that they do, is to pull back the
mm.
curtain and
How ridiculous we are as
well,
humans.
yeah, and so it's interesting that, and I can see why this is such an important debate in that
Yeah.
community, because
mm, mm,
you have these hot spots flaring up, and like we were talking about, you learn through conversation, you learn
mm.
through listening. I don't know, I
And,
just
and I know that you're right. No, I think you're right. You are right in that sometimes you don't know if you've gone too far until you've gone too far.
yeah.
And the problem is now that when you go too far as a comedian, you're immediately cancelled. You don't have that space to experiment anymore.
Yeah, how do you know when you've gone too far when
Mm,
until you cross that line? Yeah, and this is also
mm,
related to, I think, adventure. Because for me,
mm.
creative work is an adventure,
Yeah.
and there's no adventure without Disney tries to do this, but I don't think you can have a safe adventure.
Mm,
I don't think we talk a
yeah.
lot about safety and making sure that people feel safe.
Mm,
But I found sometimes, and this is coming from an old white man, of course, but I find sometimes I try and be respectful and enter into spaces how people want that, or what that people are hoping for, or wanting, or expecting. But sometimes I find conversations can be so safe, too safe. They can be so
mm.
safe that,
Yeah.
wow, okay, nobody's going to offend anybody, nothing's going to happen.
Mm, mm. It's interesting because it's also a part of as part of the workplace. I think this is again one of the kind of misconceptions of collaboration in that it's harmonious and everyone's being nice to each other and being soft with each other. And no, that real good, true collaboration feels edgy and it feels I remember writing an article and I was like, it puts a fire in your belly. Like you come out of a
Mm,
really intense debate where respectful debate, and I think this is again one of the problems with us as humans is that we haven't evolved our skills to know naturally how to have respectful debates. We need to learn how to do that. But yeah, we have respectful debates and yeah, that's what good collaboration feels like. It feels like we had a good argument then.
yeah,
We actually, yeah, we disagreed with each other. And at one point, I really wanted to go for Dave's throat,
strangle you.
but actually, but look, we come to the other end and we've got a really great idea now.
As a facilitator, as a workshop designer and facilitator, how do you create a space that is safe for
Mm,
people to feel edgy? How do you balance that safety with the kind of
mm.
risk that is sometimes required to break through?
Yeah, I think it's I'm just going through my memories and it's really situational in the team. It really depends on where the team is.
Mm,
If the team is in a not so good place, you first have to go through a space where they feel completely safe before you can start to get them to take risks together.
yeah,
I also say it's almost like you've got to test the waters with the team as well. As a facilitator, you're going in, you don't really you try and get as much information as possible beforehand. You speak to people individually, maybe you do some interviews or you do some surveys and you get as much information as possible. You still don't really know until you've seen the team together in action. And I think that those first interactions with you as a facilitator, that's where you're testing how far you can go. Because if you go too far too early, then you've lost the trust of the group. If you push the team into a place where they feel uncomfortable, then that also has an impact on how much they trust you. So I think even as a facilitator, you have to build a relationship with the group for that time and space.
yeah.
And that is about building that trust up to a level where then people do feel safe to take those risks. But you can't fast track that, I don't think. Um,
So, so how do you go about testing how far you can go without crossing that line? I mean, like,
yeah, I mean, I think being safe straight away, doing something that is non-threatening with the team, seeing how they respond, and then you turn up the dial a little bit. But I think if you
mm,
go in thinking, oh, I'm really going to shake things up and I'm going to get them to do this thing that I know is going to be uncomfortable to them, then I think you've already gone too far as a facilitator, at least in the first part of the workshop. But I think do something like all of my, I don't really do icebreakers, but all of my check-in questions there or the start of a workshop, it's something that feels like natural and normal to the team.
mm,
I'm asking them, what was the thing that you felt proud of that you did last week? Or what was your learning from? I'm not asking them like, tell me about a time that you failed and you looked really stupid. I'm not asking them to share that in front of a team when they're in front of the rest of the team when they perhaps I haven't felt what that feels like, what the group feels like, and whether it feels safe to do that. So yeah, you're always feeling and responding as a facilitator. I think this is going through my mind. I'm
Yeah.
speaking as thinking as I'm speaking. But yeah, I think that's my. I think for me, this probably goes against your kind of principled adventure, but in the very initial stages, I err on the side of caution until I've got to know the team. And then when that trust is built and I understand and I really do get to see the dynamic, then we can turn the dial up and turn the dial up gradually.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I find it really interesting that you say you don't do icebreakers, because I don't do icebreakers either. In fact,
Mm,
I hate
yeah.
icebreakers when other people do them. And I don't know, I wonder if there's something around this idea of we assume that we're frozen when we get
Yeah.
started. Or I do like to think in terms of fire starting, or starting
Yeah.
stoking energy, and it takes a little bit of work. But I think the thing, I don't know why you don't do icebreakers. Maybe before I tell you why I don't, I should hear why you don't.
I just think that we have to be careful as facilitators because some people in the teams that are working with have already got an idea, or they already think they've got
Hmm.
an idea of what it's going to be like to run a workshop. I ran a workshop a few months ago with a team they were a great team, but they got to the end of the workshop and they said, I honestly thought you were going to make us do trust falls because that's what their image is of a workshop. And so we have to go in and we always have to challenge that idea that they have. They've probably been part of terrible team building exercises, or they've film and TV aren't very good at depicting what true facilitation is like because it's not entertaining. True facilitation is actually probably quite boring because it's just people sitting around having a good conversation, essentially.
Yeah.
In TV and film, they have to dramatize it, they have to make it look really bad. Um, in order for it to be entertaining. So this is what people's image is of what we do as facilitators. So we have to challenge that. So one of the reasons I don't do icebreakers is because I don't want to feed into that stereotype of what a workshop is.
I love that. And it's very similar. For me, they always feel forced, fake, phony,
Yeah.
kind of the office birthday party. We're gonna, we're still in the office, we're still working, but we're gonna have some
Mm,
cake and balloons or pizza. But yeah, there's something
yeah.
they always seem like icebreakers seem like they're imposed. They don't naturally emerge
Yeah.
when people get together. They do we do have rituals for getting
Mm,
to know people and saying hello, but like your
absolutely.
summertime drink,
Yeah. Yeah.
what is that?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think the worst one is tell me an interesting fact about you. I saw
Yeah.
that there's a kind of an Instagram meme where a
Something that
teacher said,
nobody else knows.
well, you were not going to tell anyone that, are you? That's the reason why nobody else knows. But I saw the alternative to the tell me an interesting fact about you, it's tell me a boring fact about you.
Mm.
And I think actually that's quite a good one because we're all like essentially all quite boring. We have like, very boring routines. And if you're not under pressure to like come up with a really interesting fact about yourself, that already makes me start to sweat and think, gosh, if I can't think of something interesting about me, then I'm not an interesting person.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it just puts lots of pressure on. So yeah, if you have to do an icebreaker, start with a boring fact about yourself.
What I like to start with,
Mm.
especially if I've got a diverse group or I don't know, what I love to start with is, why are you here?
Mm.
Because
Yes, yeah,
in any gathering,
yeah,
everyone's got a reason, even if it's my boss made me come. Everyone, and that is, I find, is not necessarily, I wouldn't call it an icebreaker, but it's a great way to say, oh, wow, okay.
100%.
There's nothing forced about it.
Mm.
But he has a reason to be here. If you don't know why you're here, maybe you could leave.
Yeah, I think the best icebreakers are related to the conversation you're going to have.
Yeah.
That's it summed up. So I think that's a brilliant opening question, which I might borrow for one of my next talks.
Yeah,
But yeah,
actually, it's not mine. It comes out of this research. I think it was done by the Nesta.
oh,
Um,
okay,
but a friend of mine was involved
mm,
in the research, and where
yeah,
it came from was they were studying how knowledge gets transferred from universities and academia into
mm,
the workplace or into industry, I think they called it. And they tried a lot of different things. They got
Mm,
together from extremely diverse perspectives, and they found that whenever one person would introduce it, what they try to do is say, okay, you're a dancer. Let's talk about your work, or you're
mm,
an engineer. What they found was that when they let one of the people set the tone, it jargon and language and context that didn't
yeah.
actually come up, and so it constrained the conversation in non-productive ways. And the one thing that
Mm,
they found that worked, which I have stolen, is
yeah.
why are you here? Because it what's nice about it is it creates somewhat level playing field.
Yeah.
And there's no, especially when people don't have a preconceived notion of how they connect with each other.
That kind of takes me back to the very early workshops that I used to run when I didn't really know that facilitation was a thing. And I used to run these sessions, and the first thing that I got people to do was write down on post-it notes one idea per post-it note what they wanted to talk about today. And it would just go on a post-it note, and then we'd use that content to run the meeting. We'd identify the overlaps across what people shared of what they wanted to discuss, and that would be the sections of the session. So that opener was people always come to something like you say, why are you here? There's always a reason why they decided to either click on the Zoom invite or travel to the room, even if they're not quite conscious of it. There's always something that they want to air or get across or share or a why that they're there. So I think that's a really great opener.
And that is exactly why I like to
Mm,
think of it as fire starting as opposed to ice breaking,
mm,
because
yeah,
what you're doing there is you're making a space for the energy that already exists in the room
right.
to reveal itself
Mm,
in the context of the situation that you're all in together. And
mm,
now you have energy you have at least
absolutely.
topics and energy captured that you can work with, because
Mm,
no energy, no work gets done.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, this has been great, Allison. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank
Taking
you.
some time.
So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Is there, if people do want to get in touch with you,
Mm.
they want to help with their teams, or they want to start thinking about workshop culture or anything else, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
I'm very easily contactable on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Alison Coward. My website is bracketcreative.co.uk. It might be a little bit harder to remember than just my name. And then, of course, there's my book, Workshop Culture, which you can find from all good bookstores.
Yeah, and you have a
Mm.
newsletter as well, which I
I do have a
recommend
newsletter.
people subscribe to. I just got a note from you this morning, in fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
So thank you so much. Really appreciate
Thank you
your
so much for
time.
having me. Yeah. Really enjoyed the chat. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on The Art of the Possible. To learn more and discover your best next step, come visit us at schoolofthepossible.com. See you next time.
I did see the stuff coming out about your creative studio, which I didn't have the
Yeah.
chance to sign. I was just in a really busy time, and I just thought I don't know if
Yeah,
I'll
no
be able
problem.
to. Yeah,
Yeah.
how's it going?
We just had last week, we had a kickoff call, and it was just
Amazing.
a chance for people to meet each other. And
Mm,
I asked for their, what are your wishes, wants, hopes, dreams? What are your expectations for what we're going to do together? And I got a ton of, here, let me show you. Like,
change the
what do you
world.
want out of this? This is what I got. Oh,
Wow.
all of people want. The thing I have in my mind is out in the world, get useful
Mm,
feedback, have an outline, a product, expand hopes and
wow, wow.
dreams. There's so many, get my menopausal community going, to find
Wow.
new friends.
It's
I'm glad
amazing.
someone put that, because that is one of my priorities out of this. Have
Yeah.
fun. Yeah, there's no lack of, and then, under what do we want to talk about? Let's see. We got all kinds of things. But number one, being creative and also making money.
Yeah. Nice. Love it.
Not
Love it.
totally a surprise, but
Good
Yeah.
stuff.
So yeah, it's going. I'm like I said, my goal for it. How do I just? Oh, here, stop sharing. My goal for it is to.
Mm,
That balance of the creative solitude and the creative Steve Jobs. One I saw a video recently where he's talking about a rock tumbler, and you put these ordinary rocks into it, and you turn it on, and overnight you put in a little grit, and
mm,
it's like what you're saying about constructive conflict. They polish each
mm.
other.
Nice.
And
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's what happens. And because creative work is so personal,
Mm,
the more people that you meet that are doing when people are doing interesting work, you want to find out what was their, what is the,
mm,
what is happening inside their solitary cave that's
mm,
helping to
mm,
make that happen. Yeah. And it's funny, having been in art school, we spent a lot of time, as much time as we spent making art, we spent talking about
mm.
what is good and why and what makes
Nice.
it good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, thank you, Dave. Hope to see you on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
keep bumping into you. And yeah, yeah, thanks again for having me. Really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Thanks for joining. I really appreciate it. Have a
All
nice
right,
evening.
take care. And you. See you. Bye.